Um, lastly, I know we'd kind of mentioned briefly before we started recording, we're talking about the HEXACO model, and they've added honesty and humility to the five-factor model. Just
Hmm.
I suppose just as a last question, what are your
I
thoughts?
wonder, because the problem with the openness as a construct was the weak internal correlations.
Mm-hmm.
So you would legitimately, if humility is an outlier in terms of being correlated with agreeableness, then perhaps and honesty as well, then
Mm-hmm.
perhaps there is a case for so it's saying there's a study here. Yeah, it's by the people that developed Hexaco. Getting mad and getting even, agreeableness and honesty, humility is predictors of revenge intentions. Well, that's not justifying breaking them up. But if it was weakly correlated, then the relationship. No, again, I don't, honesty, humility, that's their construct. I want something other than them.
Well,
Um, but I would expect humility to be associated with just low agreeableness. It would be
mm,
unless it is weakly associated with it, unless then there would be a case.
well, what I have here is what they're suggesting is honesty and humility specifically focuses on sincerity, fairness, and modesty, whereas agreeableness includes a broader range. So it suggests they're like tightening it up a bit, maybe.
Well, yeah, or would these, that's a good point, or would these traits, um, what's the word I want? Imbricate. That's the word I want. The other traits. So, for example, an element of conscientiousness is politeness,
Hmm.
and you can see how it is modest to be polite, and so perhaps modesty would come under conscientiousness. And an element of humility perhaps would come under conscientiousness as well, because it's following rules rather than an
Hmm.
arrogant person that might break the rules. So I'm open to we've got to be clear. We're basically, when you do psychological research, there is very strong pressure to use the big five. And
Yeah.
as I said, I had this study. I can't remember whether we've published it. I'll check if we published it, but where we used Hexaco. And I remember that we had difficulty getting it published just because it was Hexaco, and there was just this kind of um, attitude that no, we use the big five. But it may well be that there could be more traits. I mean, maybe there could be 10. I mean, people have talked about
Yeah.
the big 10. It's a question of what with the data you have and in the circumstances that you are doing it allows you to make the most parsimonious correct prediction. Some people have talked about what was that guy? That guy that died that was at Edinburgh University. Oh God, what was his name? Uh, but what was his name now? But he the big three. So it doesn't have to be. No, I don't think I've published this paper. Hexaco. No, it's not coming up. So there you go. So I wrote that paper years ago. We still don't seem to have published it. So yeah, the big three, and as I say, I mean, J. Philippe Rushton and people like this developed or Dimitri van der Linden looked very much at the big one. It's just general factor of personality, where you take the
Mm.
pro-social traits of each of the big five and you make a general factor, and that has quite good predictive validity. So there's no inherent reason to use the big five. And it's just one of these things, I guess, that you find in academia, unfortunately, which, as Thomas Kuhn or whatever talks about, it just becomes embedded, and then that's it. You can't question it, or
Yeah.
it's difficult to question it. There's no. It's the big five is not written in stone any more than the concept of intelligence or any concept is
Mm.
written in stone. They're just ways of taking the mass of information that is the world and navigating the world in such a way that successful predictions can be made. That's what categorization is. And no set of categories is perfect. There's always things on the borders or that don't quite fit. I think openness is a good example of that. It's an attempt to come up with a category, which a lot of it's sort of almost things that don't fit into the other categories in some ways.
Yeah.
Um, and then a basic construct of openness. And so it could be that honesty, humility um, could be separate, and that might make sense of a few anomalies that we might
Well,
have. That's certainly what
it,
that pair
it,
are.
because again, I'm looking at the practical application. What they're suggesting is by adding honesty and humility, it's addressing moral and ethical dimensions of personality, which
Mm.
I would imagine, as you said a moment ago, we are looking at things like conscientiousness.
When people are high in agreeableness and high in empathy, it can often mean that they put those traits and the importance of those things, basically harm avoidance,
Yeah.
not hurting people's feelings,
Mhm.
above truth. And so they will lie or
Yeah. Yeah.
convince themselves of the veracity of lies
Yeah.
in pursuit of agreeableness. And I've done many studies on, looked at many studies on this, that, for example, in university, women will tend to put feelings and whatever above the pursuit of truth. And in that sense, in that narrow sense, I mean, I'm sure in their broad integrity, you know, whether they will uh, fiddle a tax form, I would expect men to be more likely to do that. But in that way, they are less honest.
Mm.
And so there is a degree to which you have to separate. I can see the point
Yeah.
of separating honesty. I don't know about humility, but honesty, objective honesty, black and white, truth or false, from these personality traits. Obviously, neuroticism will militate in favor of telling lies, selfish, psychopathic, dark triad, fine. Um, and we can see conscientiousness might do so because, oh, these are the rules and we don't break the rules and we must
Yeah.
uphold the rules and don't think outside the box. Could extroversion militate in favor of lying? I don't know, in order to achieve social ends, perhaps, or achieve extrovert supply, you know, of sensation seeking, you might tell lies. So it's nothing to do with extroversion. So yeah, I can see the argument that even with agreeableness, you might think honesty, agreeableness, but that's not quite so.
Mm.
And so there could be then a case for just separating out whether a person is honest. But then what's that sort of underpinning in terms of it raises the question of, is there a certain kind of personality that's more honest? And that's probably true, that overall a person that's agreeable is going to be more honest.
Mm.
But then on the other hand, could it be that a person that has low agreeableness and doesn't give a toss about offending people will also be in a way more honest?
Mm.
So it's an interesting,
It
that's
is, and
showing you the imperfection of the model.
yeah, and it reminded me of something I said one time. I think it was an answer to a question someone had out. I think it was on Twitter about recognizing the difference between a good thing and the right thing.
Hmm.
They're two very different things, and I'm just wondering, just because that came into my head, that's
I
the
suppose that it's the whole notion.
moral and ethical the moral and ethical dimension, so that's what come into my head, the difference between a good thing and the right thing. It might feel like a good thing to tell somebody something,
Yeah, but
not necessarily the
if you're
right
going to
thing.
talk about the right thing as distinct from a good thing, then this almost implies that there is moral absolutism. That
Yeah.
there's objective. There's almost an objective set of moral truths. I mean, we then get back into the realm of metaphysics if we go that way, I think. But I mean, it gets us into that question
Mm.
of if you're going to say there's an objective truth, because the alternative is to say that what is right is
Mm.
varies according to cultural circumstances hugely, and so what is right, what is good,
Yeah,
that's
it's
mm.
it's not necessarily, I think, one's better than the other, one's right and one's wrong, but it is recognizing there is a difference between the two.
I suppose it's an interesting idea because that's with agreeableness, this idea that if you're very high in agreeableness, you will be honest in one set of ways. You
Hmm.
know, you won't fiddle your taxes or whatever. But if you're very low in agreeableness, you will be honest in another set of ways.
Hmm.
And so honesty it could be seen as at the two poles of agreeableness,
Yeah.
perhaps. And I wonder if there's if there's any other um, facet that would operate in the same way, that would be at the two poles of a big five personality trait? Is there something that both extroverts and introverts do, for example, or both the mentally stable and the mentally unstable do? It's an interesting
It is.
possibility. If you are very high in rule following and very low in rule following, no, I can't think of anything. The only thing I can think of is honesty. But that would be interesting because you get this notion that, for example, with something like creativity, um, there's an optimum placing on the schizotypal scale, let's say, and schizotypy scale, however you pronounce it. Too high, schizophrenic, you can't achieve much. But too low, i.e., very low openness, then you don't tend to be particularly creative. So there's an optimum level of openness, basically of openness that's creative, and extreme openness verges over into things into pathology, and so then it's not creative. It doesn't it militates against creativeness. Um, so and in the same way that I could see perhaps extreme autism would be negative. Extreme conscientiousness would be negatively associated with creative achievement because you're just rule following, but
Mm,
extremely low conscientiousness would be negatively associated with it because you wouldn't follow things through, or you wouldn't
mm,
ultimately achieve anything. So
yeah,
there'd be an optimum, relatively low level of conscientiousness which would be associated with it, and so it would be a place on a scale. But what we're saying, what we're suggesting with honesty is that potentially it would be two places on a scale relating to two kinds of honesty: telling the blunt truth and being broadly morally honest.
yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Hmm. I feel a paper coming on. Yeah. But you see, it's a fascinating thing with Big Five, and it's there's more to do. You can't just rest
Mm,
on your laurels with these things and say, okay, we use the Big Five. There's that is an issue with it. There are certain traits which, one questions which Big Five trait they will be factor analyzed down into, and there are certain traits which don't quite fit. I'll ask. Yeah, I've got some colleagues I can ask about this. I'll write this down. Yeah, I forget. I've got a lot. I've got things that will make me forget at the moment. Like
yeah, I-
so.
I've got one of those lives too.